presence as we look to you and hope in your coming. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. I always try, what is try? To look for good news. We definitely want to end with some encouragement, but we always try to look for some good news in the news concerning the Bible, how the church is doing. Are there any even small revivals, those kinds of things happening? And to be frank with you, this week was very, very difficult to find. In fact, the opposite again. We continue to see all of what the Lord had promised would come upon the earth happening in Matthew 24 and other places. And so we'll start with the church, but it's not the greatest of news. This is from Christianity Today. In 2019, approximately 3,000 Protestant churches were started in the U.S., but 4,500 Protestant churches closed, according to estimates from Nashville-based Lifeway Research. And again, Lifeway is a very valid research center. I remember being in Dallas, and they talked about these things, and they talked about how many churches were closing every day. And I think if I remember right, at the time, I heard 3 churches were closing every day. And I couldn't believe that. It was very difficult for me to believe. But look at these numbers. 4,500 churches closed. That's more than 3. That's almost 4. And so it's very sad news. The Evangelical Research Organization analyzed congregational information from 34 denominations. That's a lot of work. And groups representing 60% of U.S. Protestant churches to arrive at the church plant and closure numbers for 2019. The current closure gap indicates a shift from Lifeway's research previous analysis. For 2014, an estimated 4,000 Protestant churches were planted, while 3,700 closed in a year. And that would have been about the time, or just a little bit before the time I heard that 3 were closing every day. So that hits that 3,600, 3,700 mark. So very sad news. While planting a church is still one of the most exciting things a pastor can do, over the past few years, and I would say others too, I don't know why they just said pastor, but others, and for maybe a pastor to be involved in, but others, worship teams, all the service that the people get involved in there. A growing hesitancy to plant, which is why these numbers aren't surprising. Starting a church from scratch is not as it used to be, especially with the rise in boomer pastors retiring and needing to find a successor. A new phenomenon rose in 2020. Church planners typically look for one of 3 locations: a school auditorium, a movie theater, or a performing arts center. But this is a good point. All 3 of those options weren't available to us after the pandemic hit, because all those closed their doors to any outside agreements based on liability issues. Now think about this, and whenever I read this kind of stuff, and I read this today, and this just struck me. Okay, Lord, this is not what you want. You wouldn't, okay, so now how many churches, let's say 3,000 churches would have been planted this year or last year. But because of the pandemic, maybe only 2,500 started, or 2,000. Lord, that's not what you want. Isn't that really interesting? That we know the mind of Christ, we have the mind of Christ, and yet he is saying, because, remember, and Gary's even talked about this a little bit on Sunday morning in this vein a little bit, that there's a time where the Lord says enough is enough, and it's going to cost you as a nation, even the church, as the Lord does these things in the world and with his church. And remember, he is refining his church, even defining his church, helping us to make sure we have the church defined in our own hearts and minds, and our work and deeds. So this does not go unnoticed by God. It means something to him, and he's going to use it for good. There's a huge division, which is going to be, I think I named this, the division continues. The division continues in the world, the division continues in the church. The Abrahamic issue is huge in the church. It is huge, and let alone in the world now. And it's amazing. It's amazing that God, He cares, and what He allows us to go through. The U.S. population continues to grow, so there is a need for new churches to share the gospel with everyone. But even before the pandemic, the pace of opening new congregations was not even providing enough replacements for those that closed their doors. I think that's probably enough to be said about the church. Probably isn't, but what more can you say? It's a sad day for the church. We should say this. This is prophesied. When it says the love of most or many, some say many, some translations.
CMA, something to do with Methodists.
The love of many, if not most, will grow cold. Right? So that means, what's the love that God is talking about? A love that counts. A love for God and a love for your neighbor. And that's growing cold.
Yes.
Across the world and across the nation, as we'll see. And so it's prophesied that these things will come, and we're to keep on top of it, watch, so that He can encourage us and bring us through this.
Pastor, CMEs, that's nothing to do with Methodists, is it?
No, this is not church related.
What do you stand for?
You know what? I can't remember at this point. Emissions. It's from the sun. Emissions from the sun. I can't remember what it stands for right now. But it's increasing. It's sun activity, and we're reminded that we've hit solar minimum, and now we're coming out of it, and it's being very active. And you're going to see comments, and I even seen one on. We roll the script, the news here, and I even seen one that said, could cause big damage. And sometimes we get a little excited because we haven't seen it in years. It says we haven't seen this in years. That's true, because it's going to a solar minimum for several years, and then it comes out, and now it's going toward a solar maximum, and you get that increased activity. But what I'm questioning in my mind is, my vision is always looking at, is it increasing problems on the planet, and what, again, for my own personal information, does it affect the earthquakes on the planet? And that's what's interesting to me. What, Jeannie?
It's coronal mass ejection.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you very much. Coronal mass injection, Bob. There's the big one there that happened in China, and then several decent ones in Iran. It's really interesting to me that in Iran in particular, there's just been a constant number of earthquakes, even down there by the Pcr reactor down there on the bottom, that little 4-point something there. And it's right on an earthquake fault there. So I continue to watch these interesting things. I didn't look at this. I just pulled this off the news. Tom Hughes' church does this, and it's on Rumble. You can find it, prophecy news update kind of thing. Look at this list of just one day of 5.0 and better for just one day. Usually this is maybe a 2 or 3 day, and you have other lists that are this long, but it's a significant list. The last 30 years, 66,000 plus earthquakes shook Iceland's peninsula. 23,000 occurred in the last year, in the last month. So, the last year, the last 12 months. So that's 1/3 of the earthquakes of the last 3 years. Of course, that kind of divvies out. There was one other report that was even more significant the further you go back. So it's really interesting that it's keeping a fairly average number there, but they're all coming up in rapid succession here in the last several months of this last year. 6,000 plus people a day are coming through the United States-Mexican border as we speak. residents from 160 countries, including most of the Muslim countries, are coming through Mexico. 172,000 crossed the border in March, and another 179,000 in April. There's the border wall. It stopped. Biden put a stop to it, and they keep coming across, which is sad for our country. I guess I should suggest that I don't know what I'm going to end up saying at some point, so don't be surprised if YouTube takes us down. It took last week's video down, and we don't have it any longer. When you mention certain things, it's going to take it down. So we're on a workaround to try to fix that. I'm not going to be afraid. I am going to use some words that won't get censored if they're useful, but I'm not going to be afraid to speak what I need to say. I don't know if you've seen how many killings this last weekend. Massive, a bunch of killings, and just in the last couple of days, these three mass shootings in greater Miami, Miami-Dade, California, of course, the big one in San Jose as well. And they're targeted. The one in Miami-Dade was targeted at like they were having an event at a classy kind of a joint restaurant or something, and they chose it. And three people got out of the SUV with some guns and just started shooting randomly, and killed 2 and wounded 20. So, and then the one in San Jose, we know this man had a mental health issue, and was able to. He had at least 3 semi-automatic weapons and lots more in his home. All these shells, 22,000 shells, which is going to give the government more ammunition to shut these kind of things down. And so they're going to be looking to do that even more. And with Biden's administration, they're going to do what they can do against guns. Latest on the virus, 1,000 lawyers and 10,000 doctors join together and file a lawsuit to persecute what they're called the Second Nuremberg Tribunal against corona fraud scandal. The Pcr test, the test for the corona, was never designed to detect pathogens and is almost 100% inaccurate at 35 cycles. All PCR tests monitored by the CDC are set at 37 to 45 cycles. The CDC acknowledges that tests over 28 cycles are not allowed for a positive, reliable result. This invalidates over 90% of the alleged cases. If that's a fact, that's a big problem. Now, again, this is going to be one of those things where, what did they call our video last week? Spam. Spam and deceptive. And what we're doing is just reporting news. What I did last week was I gave a definition of something, and they didn't like it. And I showed a picture from Nazi Germany, and they didn't like it. They call it spam. Okay, fine. Well, I'm reporting news here. This is just news. It's not my news. It's somebody else's. And if these lawyers and these doctors take this up, we'll see what happens. What I do know is this, that these tests were they didn't go through the normal test cycles. They didn't have long enough. They can't prove to anybody that they went through the normal test cycles, YouTube. Get that on your, they didn't go through the normal cycles. And that's really what a human at least deserves, is before you take something, to have a normal test cycle and see what it's going to do. But anyway, we'll see how this comes out. The ramifications of these shots, they're still pushing this. They're giving $1 million awards, lotteries, for people who are taking again, that's news. I'm just reporting the news. And that is stupid. That is dumb. That's my opinion. Oregon is kind of doing the same thing, Governor Brown there. And it's very sad. And think about this now. If there are huge ramifications for this vaccine, and we find out a year or 2 later, most of these companies are able to opt out of being sued for this. We'll see how these lawsuits go. But it's just very interesting what the human race is doing right now, and actually may be setting a lot of the human race up for a huge failure. We'll see what happens. On 60 Minutes last week, and I don't know if you saw, I don't really watch 60 Minutes anymore, but I got home last week and flicked the TV on, and 60 Minutes was on, and they just happened to have people who were talking about reverse transgender care or reverse transgender identity, and how people were saddened by what happened and they didn't get the counseling. This person, I think it's one person, I'm remembering, they had the ability to get everything they needed within 3 months. It's just horrendous what it's doing to some of the folks. America had one transgender care center in 2007. Now, 14 years later, we have over 50. Over 50. And what 60 Minutes reported, again, YouTube, what 60 Minutes reported was that it's becoming a thing to do. It's like, you're smoking cigarettes, I'll smoke cigarettes. You'll take a drink, I'll take a drink. Well, you're going to do this, I'll do that too. And with very little counseling, with hardly any spiritual counseling. In fact, in a bunch of states, spiritual counseling is outlawed.
Are these for treatment or maintenance or?
Treatment to transfer over. Transgender to transfer over. And it is absolutely sad in what is happening to our country. And let me tell you folks, if this is not the end of our society, then I'm afraid of what's ahead. Because this is frightening and very sad for our children. It's very sad for our churches and our community and everything. Bob?
These centers are in support of transgenderism then?
Yes, they're helping kids,
Okay.
and they're helping the youth.
Support.
They're helping the youth transgender, okay? They're helping the youth cross over. And it's and yet pastors are outlawed in many states to try to stop this. And it's wrong and it's sad, and we'll see what's happens after this. Jeannie, do you have a?
Oh, I thought at first you were saying they were transferring back, but that's
No,
not it.
I mentioned that there were kids that 60 Minutes were talking to that wanted to go back. And there's more of those. There's articles that I've read, and I have numbers, so I won't throw numbers out there. But there are numbers, and these kids even talk about it. They were angry because they didn't have somebody pushing back on them. They didn't have anybody. They just said, in this one case, the person came in and was, excited to get help, and the people were more than glad to help them, and had medicines. I can't remember how fast, but that fast, and within 3 months, they were on their way. So it's very, very sad and dark. It is very dark. And I'm going to say this too. Whatever was happening in Genesis chapter 6, and whatever Jesus means, as it was in the days of Lot, as it was in the days of Noah, I believe that this has something to do with it. And this is horrendous, what is happening to our country, let alone the world. So. As for Joe Biden, here's a good cartoon that came up. I don't like to put a lot of cartoons up here, but here's one. My plan will create jobs. And so he shuts down the Keystone Pipeline. And by the way, when Trump left, he had a lot of, or many, I should say, reserves signed up to come and sign leases, and they were going to start tapping into other lands. And when Biden came, he shut down those leases. He shut those down, and he shut down the Keystone Pipeline. And then I mentioned, and I just want to stay on top of this Nord Stream 2 thing in Germany. Basically, it's between Germany and Russia. We would say EU and Russia, but really it's all going to Germany, and they're going to have a lot of control over it. So the government said, okay, we're going to sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, anybody having to do with it, which was the proper thing. And people, when that happened, we were like, okay, you know, this is a good thing. This is another good thing that Biden is doing. But that same day, in fact, right afterwards, what did he do? What's the word I'm trying to think of? He said, we're going to set those aside. We're going to set it aside. They're in place, but we're going to set it aside for now. So we're not going to sanction those companies. And so Russia, full speed ahead. Russia, one of the most problematic countries, them and Iran and China, the most problematic countries on the planet right now. Putin is doing whatever he wants. And how are we funding it? How are we going to help fund it? Right there. And so this is a huge, huge problem. And Biden, you know, this caricature is right on to me. Egypt's military drills. Now, what I'm going to do is just touch on a couple things before we get into the Middle East, okay? Egypt's military drills in Sudan are unprecedented. It's one of the largest military drills they've ever had. And why did they have it in Sudan? Remember the Renaissance Dam coming open? The second filling, they fill that dam in stages to test it and to make sure the rest of the world isn't mad at them. It isn't working. But they've finished the first filling. They're going to start the second filling soon. And Egypt's saying, don't do it. You know, don't do it. Sudan is getting louder about it. They've been kind of nicer than Egypt has. But remember, you know, Egypt's, I can't remember how many, 400 million people live on the Nile there, I think, if I remember right. Just a massive amount of people there. So this thing is going to continue to ramp up if they can't fix something. Ethiopia, still causing problems in Tigray, between them and Eritrea, and all kinds of people. In Nigeria, Christians were killed again last week, a mass killing. Africa still continues to be a real mess. Up in the Caucasus, this thing kind of settled down where Russia and Turkey got together and kind of fixed that thing up there. Well, it's ramping back up again. Azerbaijan Ministry of Defense and infiltration attempted by Armenian forces on the border between the two countries thwarted, and 6 Armenian soldiers were captured. The situation on the border is explosive there. The latest is they've kind of calmed this down. Russia continues. They said they put up another small base, outpost they call it, on the border there. So Russia, this kind of stuff continues to bring Russia down to bring the peace, and Turkey is fully involved as well. So Armenia will allocate land and for communities for the Russian FSB, which is the old KGB. They're going to allocate land for that. So Russia continues to get land down south. Biden's Asia czar says era of engagement with cheese China is over. Now, when I read this, when I read the title, I'm thinking, okay, they're going to step up against China, and they're going to start doing some things that Trump maybe was doing. It's the opposite. And they're going with what they've said, but watch how this plays out. The period that was broadly described as engagement has come to an end. The coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs on the National Security Council said, as an event hosted by Stanford University, U.S. policy towards China will now operate under a new set of strategic parameters. The dominant paradigm is going to be competition. Beijing's behavior was emblematic of a shift towards harsh power or hard power, which signals that China is determined to play a more assertive role, he said. COVID-19 origins are just one part of the contentious and complex U.S.-China relations. Let's stop there for a second. Did you see the news on Wuhan lately? Have you seen what Pompeo said yesterday? That it is becoming very clear, more clear than ever, that the military was involved with coming up with this virus. They were using those things to make weapons and those kinds of things.
Who's military, ours or theirs?
The Chinese.
Oh, okay.
The Chinese are using the bat virus and others. By the way, there was another report that several of those people, or some of those people that were working with those bats were bitten by the bats and those kinds of things. So this kind of stuff is kind of leaking out of the lab in Wuhan, China. Beijing claims over the South China Sea human rights in Xinjiang region, the future of Taiwan and Hong Kong, and economic concerns, including the deployment of 5G technology and a global shortage of semiconductors. Those were the problems between Taiwan and Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong and the United States. Chinese and U.S. officials have said they see areas of mutual cooperation, particularly on climate change. Because at the UN, do you remember what happened several months ago at the UN? China let the United States have it. They said, we're not going to take your hegemony anymore, your type of leadership, we're not, and they really upset the United States. But the only thing that they could agree on then was climate change. So that's why they said this, which is ridiculous, of course. But on many other issues, the relationship is far more frosty, to say the least. Now watch this. This just came out. There's Biden here. He's at Mass. He comes out. I had a long conversation for 2 hours recently with the Chinese president, making it clear to him. Now watch, see what Biden's saying? Watch what he's saying. I'm making it clear to him. We could do nothing but speak out for human rights around the world, because that's who we are. Okay. Is this competition? You see, this is double talk. He is speaking to the American public here. He's not speaking to the Chinese. He's speaking to your heart. Biden said, I'll be meeting with, here's another one, I'll be meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in a couple weeks in Geneva, making it clear that we will not stand by and let them abuse those rights. I don't believe him. We'll see what happens, but I can tell you this, Putin's not going to listen to him whatsoever. He can talk all he wants, Biden can talk all he wants to the, pretending like he's talking to the Chinese, pretending that he's talking to the Russians this way. But what is he doing about it? What is he doing about it? And unless he does something, it's going to continue. Taiwan's foreign minister, remember after all they said, Taiwan's foreign minister warns Xi's army is preparing for war. Taiwan's foreign minister braces for future conflict, warning, I think Beijing has been preparing for war against Taiwan, and that is what we have been seeing. They are preparing for it. If you look at the number of sorties, attacks from troops, it's around 2,900 times last year. So the threat has been increasing. Beijing has been trying to cut off Taiwan from the world with military actions and international pressure. Beijing regards Taiwan as a breakaway province, threatening to start a conflict in order to reunite the island with mainland China. The United States let Hong Kong go. The treaty there, the agreement there was not up. China forced the hand, and we let Hong Kong go. Under Obama's reign, we let Crimea go. YouTube, that's the facts. We have a treaty with Crimea. We had one, and we let it go. We have one with Ukraine, we'll see. We have one with others, we'll see. I'm not calling for war. All I'm saying is this, that when you allow these things to just go, and you can talk to the American people but not them, your word is not worth salt. And that's a big problem. Into the Middle East, real briefly. The Iranian militias in the Middle East are out of control, out of hand. And I think, I can't remember, you might have to help me if I mentioned this last week, because they took down our video. Anyway, so what happened was, the protesters were coming out, concerning elections and some other things, the Iraqi people want Iraq back. And they want Iran out. Even many, or some at least, of the Shia Muslims are happier if Iran is not involved. The Iraqi citizens who are Shia want to deal with their own nation. Okay. But now there's so many Iraqi militias involved now that they're pressuring protesters, they're killing protesters. So one of the commanders last week was put in jail, and these protesters showed up with guns and SUVs and trucks and pressured the government to let him out. And so who won? Iran won. Now the protesting is still going on, but it's really become a huge, horrible mess. And if they have that much pressure on, this is Baghdad, by the way, if they have much pressure on Baghdad, in Baghdad, how much power does Iran have in Baghdad? A lot. A lot. James, did you have a question?
Yeah, aren't they both communist countries and so forth? And what, I'm having a little trouble here, what are they like fighting over?
Well, they're fighting over their own country. Iraq wants their own country. The people want their own country. Iran is infiltrating Baghdad, Iraq, because Iraq wants, Iran wants what? A portal to the sea. They want a straight shot from Tehran to Lebanon, okay, to Beirut, and the port there. So that's what they're shooting for, and Iran is a huge part of that. And by the way, oil is a big part of that as well. It goes right through the oil fields of Syria, and all that's in play there, okay? So that's in play. Shia militia leader accused of killing activists have been released following the militia's blockade of the Green Zone and deployment of militias in the Iraqi capital. The Green Zone is near, or they say that the Americans are in the Green Zone, in the portion blocked off there. But the Green Zone, the United States is being pressured out of here. We really have no influence there, really whatsoever, I would suggest. The only thing that is happening is that the United States is still being used militarily to fight ISIS and to fight off some other issues there, but the government is under pressure there to get us out. We'll see how that goes. Let's move to Turkey. I put this title up here, the Turkey, the new Russia, because they are sounding like Russia in a big way. Their lira was at a record low, so their money is going south. So what do? They sell arms. They don't have oil to sell. Russia has oil to sell. But the Turks, what do they have? They have arms. They're building arms. How did they come up with that technology? Because they're in NATO, and they've been a prime partner with the United States.
What's their relation?
They were help building the F-35 when Congress said, you're not helping us with that any longer, and you're definitely not getting them because they bought Russian S-400s, okay? So watch what Turkey's doing. Turkey's President Erdogan, after meeting his Polish counterpart in Ankara, will for the first time export drones to NATO EU member Poland, and will soon deploy F-16s to Poland as part of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. Something that else is happening here is that Turkey, Erdogan, has been partnering with Ukraine to sell them the UAVs. Turkey is becoming a big player in the UAV market, building them and using them. We'll see that in a second. Turkey is on course to achieve $10 billion lateral trade target. A killer drone hunted down a human target without being told to. Last year, how do you say it?
Autonomous.
Autonomous, yeah, duh. An autonomous weaponized drone hunted down a human target last year and attacked them without being specifically ordered to, according to a report from the UN Security Council's panel of experts on Libya, published in March 21. That was published in the New Science magazine. The March 2020 attack was in Libya and perpetrated by a Kargu 2 quadcopter drone produced by Turkish military tech company, STM, during a conflict between Libyan government forces. Yes?
So was that just a random victim?
According to this, no, the victim, I'm not sure. What I think is happening, and they're not going to give these specifics out, but what I think is happening is they have this list, and they have these faces of the enemy, all right? They plug them into the AI system, and then when they say, you know, go get this guy, get this guy, they have them plugged in there, I think, into the system. And according to this, nobody pushed the button that says, hey, go get this guy. But it did anyway. So we're really not 100% sure on this whole issue. I do know this. This is what I do know. The UAV thing with Turkey is getting out of hand. They're using it everywhere. In Azerbaijan, Armenian war, they're using it in Syria, huge way on the Syrian border, in Libya, of course, and now they're going to sell them. And so this is really a big deal, because you don't have to have military, you know, you could be sitting at your home 1,000 miles away killing people, which is sad to say the least. But it's very, very dramatic. And Turkey needs money. So it seems like if they've got this technology, that's what they're going to do. Assad won elections this last week. Any surprises? Yeah, okay. Watch this. 95%. Has anybody ever gotten 90%, 95%? Oh, they probably said, well, let's not make it 100 because that looks weird. I think 95 looks weird myself. Assad took 95% of the vote. The parliamentary, I can't talk tonight. I can't read, and there's nothing else.
Need some coffee?
I need, yeah. Speaker, no, I don't, Leslie. Thank you. The speaker announced Thursday, amid accusations from Western countries that the election was neither free nor fair. Can anybody say "da Ralph"? Yeah. Assad, who is also commander-in-chief of the armed forces, responded by ordering a brutal crackdown on the protesters, and civil war swiftly ensued. Throughout the war, that has killed more than almost 400,000 people and displaced half the population. Assad's position has not changed, and he has shown no indication of stepping down, and he won't. He's actually in there for another 7 years. He gets 7 years. Remember what Putin's done recently. He can stay until he's an old man. President Xi of China, now he's lifetime president. So these tyrants, you know, they continue to stay in there. By the way, Iran is going into elections here soon, and they have outlawed many of the people who are running. And so I think if I remember last time, there was 4 or 5 people that they're allowing to run for president. We'll see what happens there. But you can bet it's going to be a conservative, and the IRGC is going to love them. So you know that. That means building. Something's being built. And so recently, the Tu-22 long-range heavy loads bomber, Russian bomber, used in Syria but hard to fly out of Russia. It came as a surprise when Russia used an Iranian base in 2016. Here's the deal. Russia completed upgrade of a runway at the base there, and Tu-22 bombers landed there for the first time. Now they've used them there, but they haven't been able to land in Syria. They landed in, I think, Iran once, at least once, but they've been coming out of Russia. These carry nuclear weapons, they can carry cruise missiles, and so this is a big change for them. Another question, again, I keep bringing up to you, do you think Russia's leaving anytime soon? And the answer is absolutely not. Their flags are on the border of Israel and Lebanon. Qatar pledges $500 million for Gaza. UAE told U.S. officials they were participate in the Egyptian-led mediation, stabilizing, and reconstruction efforts, but clarified UAE will not provide direct humanitarian support, but will provide direct humanitarian support, but will not fund any effort that involves Hamas. They're the only ones, the UAE are the only ones that have stipulated that. Everybody else is piling on $500 million here from Egypt, from Qatar, from others. At the end of the recent war, Hamas estimated the damage caused is of a little over $300 million. However, the more money offered to help them, the more Hamas is updating the damage figures in order to justify the news of all the money and keep most of it to build a new terror infrastructure. So Farag told of $1.4 billion was promised to be given by Egypt, Qatar, the US, Belgium, Canada, Japan, and others, the UAE. So they spent, we don't know how much they spent. Some say 30 million, some say 300 million. I don't know how much those pathetic little rockets they fired. They're not smart. They're not very expensive. They lost a lot of buildings. The biggest thing they lost was lives. But let's say they spent 300 million. They're going to get 1.5 billion, and it's going up. And so, who's smiling here? Following the backlash, Anwar, which is the head of the Palestinian, they're the ones that get the funds for the Palestinian Authority. The director apologizes for saying the Israeli army rarely attacks citizens. Okay, so I thought that would be a nice thing to say, right? The Israeli army rarely attacks citizens. That's a nice thing to say, right? Watch. The director told Israel's 12 on Sunday, I also have the impression that there is huge sophistication in the way that Israeli army struck Gaza over the past 11 days. Yes, they did not hit, with some exceptions, civilian targets. On Tuesday, he apologized for those remarks after being harshly criticized by Hamas and Palestinian groups and others. There was a marked improvement by Hamas in the number of rockets and mortars fired into Israel, although the projectiles caused relatively few casualties in Israel. 200 rockets were long or medium range, of which 120 were fired at the Tel Aviv region. I want to stop there for a second. When maybe you remember the map, but you have Gaza, which is that little strip in the southwest. And then just north of them is Tel Aviv, just right at the coast. So it's an easy target. Just right up the coast is Tel Aviv. And it's the largest, by the way, the largest target as well there. The rest were launched towards Jerusalem or other areas at the Arava, south of the Dead Sea, 250 kilometers from Gaza. Hamas has 60% of its original 15,000 rockets left, including hundreds capable of hitting the center of the country. Hamas attempted to flood the Iron Dome missile defense system by firing more than 100 rockets at Ashkelon in less than a half an hour, or barrages of dozens of rockets at the Tel Aviv region. And there was relatively small damage, but there were people who died. You would see like a 10 or 12 story building in Israel, and then a missile, come and hit it. It does very little damage, but I mean, it's just random. You just never know what's going to happen and when. So, the Iron Dome was a great operational success, saving the lives of dozens of Israeli residents. Like Hezbollah, Hamas seeks to improve the precision of its rockets. That's why a substantial number of Israeli airstrikes were aimed at sites linked to the development of precision weapons. More than 10 central figures in Hamas development team was killed during the two projects. But where do you think the money's going to go when they get it? And really, the UAE is onto something. Don't give it to them if it's going to Hamas. The government of Gaza is Hamas. The government of that strip is fighting against the government of the West Bank. They're all Palestinians, but Hamas wants full control of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. 680 rockets were misfired and fell in Gaza. So they fired the red, they're fired out, and blue, they landed. Point of impact are inside the border. Clashes between these two. Fatah, which is the West Bank Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. Okay, so Fatah is near Jerusalem and over, and Hamas is in Gaza, and they're fighting. And remember what is it? Genesis chapter 10, where they will be wild donkeys. Now remember, that's talking about Ishmael in particular, but they all intermarried, and there's a lot of this going on between Arabs. The senior Hezbollah official smuggling rockets into Palestine, moving full force. So it continues to, this is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah's deputy secretary said Palestinian operatives have undergone training by members of the Axis of Resistance to help them produce weapons. We were in daily contact with the leaders of the resistance and the Palestinian jihadi fighters. Our position was that we would assist the Palestinian resistance in every way that we can, and that we will do what we must do at the appropriate time and in the way that we choose, he said. He stressed that his organization rejects the idea of a two-state solution. Isn't that interesting? There's three groups I would say. There's three groups that reject the two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. It's the Muslims and many of the Arabs. The Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, and the conservative Christians. We want a one-state Israel solution, but they don't. They want a one-state Palestinian or Arab or Muslim. He stressed that his organization rejects the idea of a two-state solution, saying the only end to a conflict is for the Jews to leave, for the Zionists to return to the countries they came from. Okay, to argue with them that they initially came out of Israel. Okay, so how far do you want to go back? 3,000 years or just like 1,000? Should we just go back 1,000? We would go back to the beginning. Well, they would say, well, Canaan owned the land. And he's right. It says specifically in the Bible, in Genesis 10 again, that the Canaanites owned the land before Israel did. But God took the land from them, because that's what he does to nations. The Americans should remember that, by the way. President Joe Biden told a press conference on Friday, there's no shift in my commitment to the security of Israel. Period. Did he say that on the tarmac to Talib? Remember, he's saying these things in public, and then he's doing something else. There is no shift in my commitment. No shift at all. I'm going to attempt to put together a major package with other nations who share our view to rebuild in Gaza without providing Hamas the opportunity to rebuild their weapon systems. My party still supports Israel. Let's get something straight here. Until the region says unequivocally they acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as an independent Jewish state, there will be no peace. Boy, is he right about that. He's absolutely right about that. But he's on to the two-state solution, do or die. That's what he's up to. And of course, we know how that will turn out. The Iranian foreign minister, Zarif, arrived in Yerevan. Now this is the Iranians. I threw this in here because we're working on the Iranians. They're going up to Armenia, all right? This is Armenia. And after his visit in Azerbaijan, and was met at the airport by the acting foreign affairs of Armenia. So here's what Iran is doing. They're doing the same thing Turkey is doing and Russia is doing. They're all visiting this, see, Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's kind of this little neighborhood. It's kind of a little three corners area, if you will, where Russia, Turkey, and Iran meet. From now on, that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it the three corners of the Middle East, or the three corners of the Caucasus. Is right there, and they all want to say right there. And so Iran has many Persians, Iranian Farsi speaking people, just over the border in Azerbaijan. And so it's very important to Iran, very important to Turkey because they're on the border. Lots of Turks up there. And of course, it's the old Soviet Union. And we know what Putin wants with the old Soviet Union. He wants it back. So I mentioned to you that Iran has been building up these super missiles and all this kind of smart weapons. And I also think I mentioned that they dedicated the latest UAV on behalf of Gaza. They named it Gaza, okay? So this is the newest Iranian UAV called Gaza, all right? A White House spokesman, we believe we are on the right track to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear arsenal. You see what happened here? Iran is continuing to do all of this stuff in all of that region and with Hamas and all of that. And now they name a UAV after Gaza, and now we're going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear missile. Watch this. IAEA chief, Iran's uranium enrichment is now at levels of countries making bombs. They're already there. They're already there. So what this all means is Israel is all by herself. There's absolutely no help for her except from God. And that's where he wants her, by the way. He wants his bride that way. He wants his son that way, to rely on God. Because they're going to need him sooner, probably than later. Here's this man, and I love this guy, Avi Abello. I mention him every once in a while. I follow him on Facebook. He's basically an Orthodox Jew, if you would. That's the way I see it anyway. I've never had communication with him, but I follow him on Facebook because he's talking to very interesting people and he's very conservative. But he's not Christian, he's Jewish. Many Jews are asking who is on our side because it seems we are now all alone. Watch, the one above is on our side. We are not alone. That's the first time I've ever heard him. That's the closest I've seen to him kind of calling out to God. He mentioned he really leans on Judaism, the temple that's coming, and all this kind of stuff, our strength. This is the first time that he's mentioned God, all right, to me. Well, two major explosions this last week in Iran. A large fire reported at an oil refinery. We okay? The refinery was inaugurated by Iranian President Rouhani just a few months ago with an expectation of generating about $1 billion in revenue for Iran. So now they got to rebuild that. They have to rebuild the Natanz plant. They have to rebuild all kinds of stuff. Another explosion. The reason for the explosion at the Safaran chemical industry is under investigation while 9 injured people have been transferred to the hospital. The blast came days after Netanyahu on Thursday said a drone downed by the Israeli Defense Forces earlier this week was launched by Iran and was armed with explosives. According to the premier, the drone was made by Iran and launched by Iranian forces toward Israel. He showed the U.S. parts of that drone when the U.S. visited there, Blinken, I think. So they have the drone. It was shot right toward the end of this last Gaza war. And so they have it. They know it's Iranian, and so they let them have it again. This explosion in central Iran, at least 9 people were injured in a blast on Sunday at a plant during the explosive materials. This is another report of the same, but it has a little take here. The blast occurred at the chemical industry at 4 a.m. Due to unclear reasons still being investigated. 9 factory workers are injured. So that's Iran, that's Israel taking it back to them. Now, there's a young lady in one of the towns here, Havat Yair, I think, in Samaria, in northern Israel. She was visiting some family up north. And they were out enjoying the day. And then they noticed some shepherds out in the field. And they knew they were Arabs, but they didn't pay attention. Nothing was happening. And as the day went on, the time went on, these Arabs started coming closer, and then it started yelling and started doing some other things, and then started throwing Molotov cocktails at the buildings and caught many of the buildings on fire. And one of the Jewish people pulled out a gun and shot and scared some of them away before security pulled up. But it was a frightening video. It's just erratic. I mean, it's really hard to even watch. But this is the kind of thing that's happening in Israel. But I want to remind you, this is what's happening in the whole nation, in the world. Think of the protests that's happened in the last month here in the United States and across the world, anti-Semitic attacks. It's happening everywhere. The mob violence that spread through Israel with an anti-Arab riots breaking out in Acre, Haifa, Jaffa, Tamra, Bat Yam, Ramallah, Jerusalem, Hebron, and many other locations was so intense that the Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz ordered Israeli border police units to reinforce local law enforcement personnel. The move was to stop incitement and agitation tearing Israeli society apart from within. So I want to remind you, I think, of what I said last week, and I think, again, it was deleted, but I want to remind you what happened. For quite a while now, the Israeli Arabs and many even of the Palestinians that live in Israel were working, were getting along with each other. There were still some problems, of course, but they were Israel is very prosperous, but with this war now, there's a deeper divide because you have to choose sides. What did Jesus say? You have to choose. You have to choose, and they had to choose. And I told you last week that Amir even had a neighbor who posted some awful things on Facebook, and so it's being a huge divide. Well, Israel is going the way of America in this way, a couple of ways, but here's another one. Netanyahu is out. Bennett has made an agreement. In fact, he lied. He said he wasn't going to do this ever. He would never do this. And then he did it. And now the division right here between these two, they were trying to come together to form a government. But now, according to watch what he says here. Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett is a liar. He is a con artist of the century because he told the right, and he is a semi-right person, I think. But he told the right, I'm never going to go to the left or left to center. I'm not going to make a deal with them. All of that stuff. And there was something else he said that he lied about too. I can't remember what that was. But Naftali Bennett says he will do whatever it takes to form a unity government with Yair Lapid. And so Lapid and Bennett will form a government, supposedly split the 4.5 years prime ministership, and they have lost the conservative government as far as that's. It is my intention to do my utmost to order to form a government. God willing, together we will save this country from the tailspin and return Israel to its course. What tailspin were they on? What tailspin was Israel on? Militarily, none. Economically, none. The COVID virus put a stop on everybody's government, so you can't count the COVID virus. Okay? You can blame the Wuhan Chinese for that. Government, by the way, for that. But then Netanyahu accused Bennett of fraud of the century and said Bennett only cares about himself and could give power to a dangerous left-wing government. Netanyahu said he had made incredible offers to Bennett to keep him on the side, according to Haaretz. So it's going the way of the United States government in a large way, and people are not going to be happy with it. And Bennett is widely expected to make a team with this person. Now, we're almost done here. Watch this. 500 American employees demand companies sever contacts with Israel. Amazon. Amazon. So that's news, YouTube. I wonder what the YouTube folks are saying, or Facebook. I'm just wondering. What's going on with our youth? What's going on with our country? It's being divided. And think about this. What we've said, I think, the last 2 weeks. God said, I will make Jerusalem a cup of stumbling. I am going to make it. I'm going to cause it. I'm going to bring a sword. Support for Israel among young U.S. evangelical Christians dropped shortly. A new survey points to a growing divide in the U.S. between young evangelical Christians and their elders, particularly in the views of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, indicating Israel could see a significant drop in supporting in coming years. While the religious group has long been a bulwark of support for Israel in the U.S., the Barna Group administered poll commissioned by the researchers of the University of North Carolina indicate a sharp drop in support for a Jewish state and raises concerns that Israel could lose a key ally going forward, its authors said. It only makes sense, right? Whatever's coming through our universities, there are our lawyers, there are governors, there are government coming forward, and the majority of them are anti-Israel. And the BDS, and by the way, the universities and others have taken them along that way as well. And a poll of over 700 between 18 and 29, just 33.6% said with Israel, 24.3% said with the Palestinians, and 42% said with neither side. All right? So that just marks a huge shift. Almost 45% of respondents now support the establishment of a Palestinian state. So, and those are young Christians. So that's going forward. Thousands attend a pro-Israeli Israel rally in New York. It was fun to see some of these. There was some of these last week. You see some flags and some cars going. Hey, there was one that went down to, what was the main street going down Hollywood with all the shops, excuse me? Yeah, Rodeo Drive. They had the Mercedes and stuff going down with with the Israeli flags. It was kind of neat. Wasn't a huge crowd, but it was interesting anyway. The demonstration, United Against Anti-Semitism, United for Us, took place at Ground Zero and in 14 other cities across the United States. Among them, and there's the cities there, it was organized by the Israeli American Council together with 100 other Jewish community organizations. Abbas, on the other hand, Abbas is saying the ceasefire must include an end to Jewish visits to the Temple Mount. So that's what he wants in his deal. Remember, he's still the head of the Palestinian Authority, and that's what he says it must happen. Referring to the ceasefire that went into effect on Friday, Abbas told Safadi on Tuesday that the period of calm between Israel and Hamas must include stopping attacks and incursions by his words, extremist settlers, backed by the Israeli occupation forces, see the words he's using, on Al-Aqsa Mosque and on our people in the West Bank. Palestinians regularly refer to visits by the Jews to the Temple Mount as incursions in which the Jews stormed the Temple Mount. The visits resumed on Sunday after a 3-week pause. Jews could not go up to the Temple Mount for 3 weeks. Now remember, when they do, they can't sing, they can't dance, they can't, do all those things. I remember when I went up, we couldn't read the Bible, and yet the Muslims were sitting around in their little Quran studies under the trees and enjoying whatever they were drinking, and we couldn't bring out a Bible, we couldn't pray, we couldn't sing, and those kinds of things. So it was very, very sad. Israeli parliament calls on Jews to go up to the Temple Mount. So now there's a call to keep going up. In spite of what Abbas is saying, they're telling, and I'm just going to skip this, parts of the Knesset is saying, go up to the Temple Mount. Okay? It's yours. Go up to the Temple Mount. We're almost done. Zechariah 14:1. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, when your plunder will be divided in your presence. Who's he talking about? He's talking about Israel. He's talking about Jerusalem. For I will gather all the nations for battle against Jerusalem, and the city will be captured, the houses looted, and the women ravished. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. This is a crucial piece of evidence here, because there's going to be many captive in Jerusalem. And it specifically says that the Lord will go there himself and release them from captivity in Jerusalem. He will go and get many others out of captivity out of Basra. He will go into Egypt, it says. And I think he goes into Elam as well. He's going to go there and do that. I was going to read parts of Lamentations, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tell you about it, all right? I want you to write down, read all of Lamentations, okay? It's not a lot. I think it's 5 chapters. And especially chapter 4, if I remember right. Well, I want to suggest something to you. The book of Lamentations was written by Jeremiah. It's after the exile, or during the exile, and afterwards. The promise there is that the Lord is going to restore Israel, all right? But when you even look through that book, there's many direct connotations to the day of the Lord. And what happens is he says, Jerusalem is going to pay a price, and then I'm going to come there, and I'm going to take them out of exile. And we all think, and most of the scholars think, well, that's back when they were in exile, in Ezekiel's day, and those. The Lord has brought them back. That's already completed. I don't believe so. I believe it's one of those twofold prophecies, where it was a near prophecy and later on. And you will see it specifically where he talks about virgin Israel taken down, decimated, and then he heals her. And he does it himself. So the more and more that I look at these books, the more and more I am convinced, totally convinced, that they are fulfilled and yet not. They are not fully fulfilled. And we're going to see Jesus do a whole lot of things. A whole lot. And the more that we can understand this, the more that I believe Lamentations means more to us. Think about this. Lamentations means so much to the Jews, and you never want to steal anything from them. They get upset at that. However, my point is if this isn't done, and we're there, it has a lot to do with us. It has a lot to do with our faith and the history of God and the way he's acted in the past. But how about the promises for the future? Read Lamentations and you will see, pointing forward, that is the day of the Lord. And when he's going to bring her back, he's going to heal her, and it's going to be a fantastic day. But until then, and one last thing. The mourning, the crying and mourning and weeping that you see in Lamentations, they're going to do again. And even more so. They're going to be ravished, just like I read in Zechariah. They're going to be torn apart more than they were the first time. And they will be singing songs. They will be doing those things that they did when they came out of exile. They'll be doing it even more when they go into the millennium and beyond. It's going to be a great day. I wish the Jews could get that idea. I wish the Jews could understand that. And even, well, I wish the Christians would get that too. I wish we could understand it, because it means something to us. Lord God, we worship you and praise you, Lord God. We do not look forward to the day that Jerusalem will fall again, that it's going to be devastation. We don't truly want to witness it, except the part that we do want to witness is that you are going to save her. You're going to save your remnant. You're going to save your bride. You're going to save your son, Israel. You're going to fulfill this book from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22. You're going to finish it, and you're going to fill it all. We're going to find our all in Christ Jesus. Amen. I pray that you'll help the Jews more and more understand this. We thank you for those whose eyes have been opened, their hearts have been opened to you. Thank you so much. Be with them. Strengthen them, strengthen the church, because we are now becoming a remnant. We pray for your help during these times and going forward in Jesus' name. Amen.